Welcome, everybody. We're excited to hold this webinar on digital success for industrial companies. As a way of introduction, my name is Freddy Solis. I'm an associate partner at innovation and strategy consulting firm Innosight, and I'm joined by my colleagues Rob Bell and Ned Calder, who are partners at the firm and who co-lead our industrial and technology solutions practice. Just in case you're not familiar with Innosight, we're global consulting firm that is solely focused on helping forward-thinking leaders and organizations navigate disruptive change. And digital is probably no surprise to anyone, is one of those disruptive changes that we see companies struggle with over and over. So we thought it'd be helpful to share a few of the lessons we've learned from the years of combined experience leading digital projects across industrial-related spaces, if you will. So before we get going with the content itself, we just wanted to share a few housekeeping rules for the webinar. First, the webinar is being recorded, and we're of course going to share the link post this session so you can either share with your organization or rewatch as you desire. All participant lines are muted, but we do want to make this session interactive, and we have the chat open for anybody that would like to send comments. And we very much welcome questions from the audience. Please submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom. We plan to answer questions as we go and also leave room at the end for any additional questions not related to the presentation. Feel free to comment in the chat as well. More than welcome. Just please bear with us as we try to keep up with the comments. With that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Rob, who's going to drive the first portion of the presentation.
Thanks, Freddie. Hi, everyone, and thanks again for joining. I'm going to take a minute just to talk a little bit about what we're on about here and what it was that motivated us to, kind of crystallize our perspective on, why digital transformation is so challenging for industrial corporations. Before I do that, though, I'm going to do that with reference to a story about a recent client. Before I do that, I do want to mention, as Freddie said, the perspective that we have on this problem is that we're strategists. And so our perspective is, how can this dynamic suite of technologies enable companies to do what they need to do in order to grow into, the future of their industries. And not so much like how can we be better at process mapping or how can we implement technologies more effectively. It's big picture. Why does this seem so challenging? And so, as I mentioned, the idea of doing this came from a recent client experience, and the name will be disguised to protect the innocent. But our client was a large, diversified, multi-divisional chemical company, really a global logo, well-known, highly skilled and committed workforce and leadership, A+, management team, very strong company. And we were doing some strategy work in one of the businesses there, and as part of that, needed to understand this question of, how is the work that we're doing on digital going to enable the strategy that we're developing? And as we dove into that problem, discovered that the answer was that there was shockingly little sort of connection between those two things. And so what we saw really was a lot of objectives set by corporate mandate, a lot of organization around tech implementation goals, teams organized around technology and function rather than, for example, process or business outcome. We saw little reference to a kind of an integrated vision for what all of this was going to enable the business to do differently in the future, and enable the strategy. So this is, and what it caused us to reflect on is, this is actually not unusual. this is kind of something that as we've engaged with clients across a wide range of industrial spaces, we've seen various flavors of this virtually everywhere that we've gone. And it caused us to then reflect on the question of why is this so hard? And what is it that we could do to help these companies to think differently about how they're undertaking this extremely important and expensive activity that would give them a better chance of getting the return on investment out of it that they certainly hope to get. So that's how we started on this journey, and what we want to share with you today is a little bit of the thinking that's evolved out of that. And before we go into that thinking, I think one point of emphasis here is how ubiquitous and how absolutely mind-blowingly huge this problem is. According to IDC, there's going to be about 6.8 trillion in spending total. Some of that's in the rearview mirror, some of it, this 4-year period completing next year. 6.8 trillion in direct investments in digital transformation during that time period. Estimates range around that, but that seems to be roughly in the zone that people agree on. And for scaling purposes, that is something on the order of 2% of gross global product. So 2% of the world's of the value being created in the world in any given year is being invested in this specific area of endeavor. I find that amazing. And yet, in the space that we're zeroed in on here, which is a large component of that, 66% of industrial firms are not meeting their digital transformation goals. So huge, widespread, and a lot of failure mode.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rob. And one of the things that we wanted to do in this session is try to make it as interactive as possible, right? Like, we know that digital is hard. It is a challenging topic, and our experience companies experience some level of bloat in the amount of projects and initiatives that they launch that leads to dissatisfaction with some degree of dissatisfaction or dissatisfaction with digital efforts. So what we wanted to do as we get into the content and our perspective is just take a pulse from attendees to the webinar on how satisfied are you with your company's approach to digital. So we're going to launch a brief poll for everybody in the audience. And all we're asking you to do is just to tell us, from very satisfied to very dissatisfied, how satisfied are you with your company's approach to digital? And then for those that are willing to share and entertain us, a 3 to 4 word answer on the chat on what is hard or what is challenging from your perspective in driving digital effectively. And we see some answers, coming in. We've got, about half of the participant list who have submitted responses. So we'll give it a second for folks to vote, but also chat is disabled. Let's see if that works. Okay. So we have some votes coming in. Let me share the results of the poll with folks. And perhaps not as expected, there's a heavy skew towards the dissatisfaction side of the scale. We see, about 25% of folks on the very dissatisfied front. We have about 43% of somewhat dissatisfied, and about a third of folks in the audience on the satisfied front. We also have a comment from an attendee of our clients have so much data, so many sources, they simply don't know how to wrangle it all in one place and learn anything, which is a pretty common challenge. How do you make sense of, as you launch more and more initiatives, of what should we be doing, which is a little bit of what we're going to share as part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Lack of expertise in-house to even know what to do. Yeah, that very common theme that we've seen also in organizations, right? Like as we launch initiatives, companies tend to put in charge folks that either have a lot of industry-related expertise, but maybe limited digital expertise, or vice versa. Okay. Ned, Rob, anything else from your side?
Yeah, I just say these are great comments, and I think there's some interconnections between the two of them, in the sense that oftentimes the lack of experience with digital limits the ability of companies to really see the potential and how they can use it to create value, and introduces that risk averse culture. So I think those two things go hand in hand in many situations.
Yeah, and these are great questions, and are directly related with a bit of the content that we're going to be sharing, as we move through the material. Okay, so why don't we're going to be chatting about these themes as we go forward, but for now, back to you, Rob.
Great, thanks, Freddie. All right, so we're going to talk to you about three things today. First, we want to expand a little bit on the challenge. What is it that we see that is, unique to industrial or B2B companies in terms of capturing the value of digital transformation? And some of these they're not all unique, but they tend to be more intensive in the industrial segments. And then talk a little bit about what we're gonna, with the slight lack of humility, characterize as our big idea, which is really about flipping the script in terms of how to think about conceptualizing and organizing around digital transformation. And then finally, Ned's going to talk to us a bit about what we see as some of the success factors in terms of putting an approach like this into place. What are the new lenses that you want to use to view strategy and customers, and how can you ensure the right organizational dynamics, which I think keys into some of the questions and comments that we're seeing in the chat. Okay, so there are a lot of ways to dimensionalize this challenge. We've found that there are really four big categories of challenges that we've seen commonly at our industrial clients who are struggling with this challenge. And I'll just speak a little bit to each of those four, and welcome questions or comments in the chat about this as we go through. The first one is about digitizing old ways of doing things. And I'm sure everyone recognizes this. And this is a pretty well understood challenge in the industry, leading to people making an important distinction between digitization and digitalization and digital transformation. But I think we would all say that, this is a challenge that remains. It is an instinct for inherently culturally conservative organizations and organizations that haven't taken a close look at how digital technology will transform their industry to want to think first about how to use it to do better the things that they're doing today. And so, if you haven't, as an organization, thought about the collective and integrated impact of these technologies on your industry and how that's going to change what you need to do, what your customers are going to expect you to do, and what you're going to want to do for them to capture the value of that relationship, then you're at deep risk of simply digitizing how you do things today, and ultimately making it more expensive and less flexible and less agile to change things in the future. The second is imposing technology out solutions. I think this also won't be surprising to the audience, but tends to be a problem that manifests particularly strongly in places where where there is something called a digital strategy, as opposed to a strategy and a digital enablement of that strategy, and is kind of endemic when the IT department owns the problem without good bilateral or multilateral communications with the with the businesses and functions in a company. So it's very easy to fall in love with the technology, the capability of the technology, to think about what are the possibilities that we could do with it, but without reference to jobs to be done, which Ned is going to talk about in a little bit, without reference to what it's important for us to accomplish, why it's important, and what that's worth, and what is the standard to which we need to accomplish these things, you're at risk of overspending or making the wrong kinds of selections in terms of technology. Separate digital solutions within functional silos. Industrial companies, tend to be organized for operational efficiency. That includes, within businesses. The businesses tend to have more power inside the portfolio of industrial companies. And then beyond that, the functions tend to be organized for economies of scale and shared services. So there's a lot of individual executive power within these units. And if you organize your digital transformation under that management structure, you're at risk of not looking across those silos and understanding what has to happen in terms of end-to-end processes that connect your functions, to those of your customers. And then finally, and I think probably, maybe the one of these challenges that rules them all is the idea of setting objectives that are disconnected from business impact. So in the example of the chemical company client that I referenced earlier, one of the mandates was to get 50% of revenue from online sales, which sounds unobjectionable at a high level. But the questions that have to nest underneath that to think about whether or not that's really something you want to accomplish are actually pretty complex. Are we actually in the process of automating or digitizing a selling process? Are we actually maximizing our ability to capture value in the client relationship? Is this actually relevant to how we want to engage our customers? What are we enabling or not enabling when we do that? And those questions really hadn't been answered, and progress and work was being done without reference to the answers to those questions. So these are four common, points of failure and modes of failure that we see. We're certainly interested to hear other ideas about modes of failure, or questions related to these. We're going to open up these just a little bit, and I think, Freddie, we're going to talk just a little bit about the first one, the digitizing old ways of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. We welcome questions, thoughts in the comments section of the chat or in the Q&A about any of the four. I think we wanted to share a brief story of another company that we work with in the industrial distribution space. Very similar situation to what Rob described with the chemical company at the beginning of the session. In this circumstance, this company was worried about a new type of player coming in the ecosystem, that they weren't sure if they were a threat or somebody they would engage or ignore. And this is a very common circumstance we see with clients. There's a new type of digital native player that is coming on board, whether it's a software player, a third-party platform, or some other form of digital player that comes on board. And there's lack of clarity of whether to engage them or not and how. I think a mistake, or a little bit of what we have here, the illustration and the analogy that we like to make is We're all, the three of us are based in Boston. And if you've ever driven in Boston, you'll recognize a little bit the shape of the streets and the intersections as you navigate the city. I think the analogy with digital is trying to digitize and set strategy for digital without understanding what the future looks like, and just digitizing what exists today, which is exactly what happened, I think, in the city of Boston, in theory, would be considered a bit of a mistake, not at least examining, how the future is going to evolve. So for this distributor coal company that we're giving the example of, I think they decided by looking into what the future environment can look like, does this player going to matter or not, whether they should actually engage this player, and for what purpose, and how to do that. And that, that isn't really an easy or linear decision for companies. Like the information about the future is oftentimes not very certain. How digital players are going to evolve is often not known, and are they a fad or are they here to stay is often a very critical and unknown question. And by the way, this is not only certain or true for new technologies, but it's also, as leaders, you may all have started to get questions, messages, or ideas, or things like AI, or have you followed the news this past weekend on things like ChatGPT? So the question we'd ask is, how can these new players or technologies help you advance your business strategy and your business outcomes as a result? So this is one of the things that makes digital hard to adopt, particularly in industrial environments, separating a bit the signal of the noise and understanding, how is the ecosystem going to evolve in the future so we can make strategic decisions. But to Rob's point, we'd love to maybe just take questions or comments, whether these 4 points that Rob shared or this first one in particular resonate with you. So what we'll do maybe to trigger some discussion is I'm going to launch a second poll that is going to ask everybody to just select from the 4 challenges that Rob shared, which of these resonate with you and with your organization. We're going to ask, you can select as many of them as they want. And we're curious a little bit, getting a little bit of color and texture on, what's challenging and what's hard, and in the spirit of making this session a bit interactive. Okay, we're just giving it a minute. We've got about 60% participation. Okay, we're just going to share the results. We're seeing a little bit, the biggest winner, and I'll let Ned and Rob feel free to comment on these. Just objectives disconnected from business impact being a bit, the one that got the most votes, with 87% of participants selecting it as a big challenge for their organization. And then next in order is just the functional silos issue as a big challenges.
I think there's a great comment in the chat about digital not being pointed at sufficiently big ambitious problems, where maybe you could make a big difference and realize the full value. That's probably an and comment. There certainly are places where digital can incrementally enhance and improve the business today, and you'll get some value out of that. But there may be untapped value if you're not pointing it at some of those bigger transformational opportunities as well.
Great. Well, if no other, feel free to keep the comments coming. We're going to keep moving along, but happy to take comments, questions. We'll hand it over to Ned, who's going to share with us a little bit, what is one perspective on how we address these challenges.
Yeah, great. And I think that last poll was a really helpful, transition, highlighting, one of the things that you all see is this disconnect between, digital and business outcomes. And that's really, I think, where we're going to spend a lot of our time. I think most folks would probably agree that, there are lots of challenges that, industrial organizations wrestle with when, trying to drive, digital, into the market. Rob highlighted 4. We could have had 10 other slides with many of the other things that get in the way of that, and there's no silver bullet here, right? Ultimately, if you're going to be successful, you've got to be able to knock down many of those things, and realizing the full value of digital will take progress across a significant set of issues. But that being said, in our experience, one of the foundational things that enables you to extract more value from digital is to get your organization to realize that there really is no such thing as a digital, strategy. That there are only business strategies which digital can support. And I'm going to repeat that because I think if you took away only one thing from, our time together here, I think it would be this point, that there really, shouldn't be a thing called a digital strategy. There really are only business strategies, which digital can support. And the power of that, statement and that realization is that it really reverses the polarity on how many companies end up approaching digital. Too often, organizations and digital priorities, either emerge from, corporate mandates trying to, convey that, we're progressing things from a digital standpoint and keeping up with, competitors and the market. Or perhaps bubbling up from the the bottom, people seeing some interesting opportunities and suggesting digital projects, but often those are not necessarily clearly connected to the organization's overall goals and objectives that they're trying to achieve, and then so it's no wonder that they don't live up to their full expectations. And so the perspective that we're offering is really to start with what the company is trying to achieve from a business perspective, and then work back to how digital can support those objectives. So start with a clear articulation of what we're trying to do, whether it's defending our large accounts and preventing decline, improving the profitability of serving smaller customers, hedging against disruption to maybe a product focus by looking for opportunities to diversify into services and solutions. Let's clarify and have the business strategy drive what those important imperatives are, and then work back to think about what role digital might have in supporting them. How does digital solutions compare to other things that we might do to solve those same problems? And on the surface, that seems like a really simple idea. It seems like a simple notion, and why wouldn't companies have that orientation? But more often than not, it's not how companies behave for a lot of the reasons that Rob described above. So with that shift in mind, what we'd like to do over the next 20 or so minutes here is we want to take a look at some of the specific blockers and success factors that can contribute to realigning a company's digital efforts, with their overall, business goals, and how you actually get an organization to shift from being, more initiatives driven to more outcomes driven in terms of how they set digital priorities. So I think in our experience, there's really 5 big ones that show up quite a bit, and so I'll talk to each of these, and then we can spend some time taking questions and seeing which ones are worth going into a little bit more depth. So the first one is really around the business strategy itself. If you're going to align your digital efforts to the business strategy, well, you better have a pretty good business strategy. It doesn't make much sense to point digital at a bad plan, and so that's foundational. Now it would probably take a completely separate webinar to fully unpack what is a good strategy and maybe some of the deficiencies we see in organizations on that front. But what I'll say here is that often companies don't fully account for the impact of digital, on their strategy, or that may be lagging as they start to think about, digital priorities. I'll give you an example to bring it to life. One industrial company, we worked with to set their digital priorities. As they got into the process, they realized that there was an issue of the emergence of third-party digital buying platforms. And when they looked at their strategy for clarity and guidance, there really wasn't a perspective on whether the organization wanted to participate with these platforms, wanted to partner with them, wanted to become a digital platform, or didn't think that they were that important, and so was comfortable, completely ignoring them. And so, as you might, imagine, without lack of clarity on that type of issue, very hard to set a, clear, priority or task against how we want, the digital team to, engage in that. And so, one of the first things that I think, you need to do when you're embarking on an effort to set your digital priorities is really take a hard look at your strategy and figure out whether it is, complete and sufficient as regards to, digital. And more often than not, at least in our experience, there are gaps that need to be, filled in as you go about that. The second one really relates to, customer and the insights that, are going to guide the development and the shaping of, digital, priorities. Companies, obviously they know their, customers well, but it's often in a very limited capacity or a limited way that indexes, towards the historical focus of the organization and where they've been and how they've engaged with customers in the market, historically. And that can be a significant constraint on the ability of digital to tap into and create new sources of value. For example, if I sell cars, if I'm in the business of selling cars, I probably understand, reasonably well the features and functionality of someone who comes in to, buy a car. But I might not understand, because I've never had to ask this question about, their broader, mobility needs and how, if I, did more than just sell cars and add services and solutions on top of that, how that could be relevant for, those other areas. And I think, that's a simple example, but I think that type of dynamic, shows up in industrial product companies quite often. They often understand the needs and requirements associated with the product, that they're selling. What they might understand less well are all the other challenges a company has with, for example, managing inventory or dealing with supply chain reliability or efficiently providing, quotes to their customers and so on. They have a vast number of issues and things that they're trying to wrestle with, for which digital solutions that you all could provide might be helpful. But if you've historically only engaged with them in a very narrow conversation about, the traditional product you sell through the traditional mode of selling, you may be missing opportunities. And so often there's a need to bring new lenses and new perspectives, and maybe even talking to different people in the organizations when you're starting to think about how can digital create value for our customers, and then therefore how can we realize some of that value for ourselves. The third one that often shows up as quite critical is acknowledging that digital does not exist in isolation. It's not something that you just drop down onto a company. It's one part of a company's overall business model or business system, and that system needs to be self-consistent and reinforcing. And as such, as you add digital elements to your business model, that often necessitates changing other things to accommodate it and get it to fit in a coherent way. So for example, if you are moving online elements of the sales and ordering process, that often requires defining or resetting the business rules for things like pricing, for which in an analog world may be handled in an ad hoc fashion through internal conversations and exceptions. And you may be trying to move away from that as you go into a digital world. And so adding that digital element to your business model requires you to think about what are the other, changes that need to go, along with it, and make those, at the same time, so that you can avoid some of those conflicts. Third one, talent and culture. Digital programs are, even though there's technology behind them, are ultimately executed by, people, within the culture and environment of an organization. And if the people don't have the right skill sets and the right experiences, or the culture is not conducive to, the requirements of a more digital value proposition and operating models, then companies can, struggle to make, progress. One of the things that shows up, I think, quite common, and one of the most common challenge, leaders wrestle with when trying to, drive a digital program at the outset, is this question of whether they try to, do we try to enable and equip our, existing folks who have the advantage of knowing the industry and knowing the business, well, but maybe have, very limited, experience, with digital? Or on the other hand, do I try to bring in people from the outside who have deep digital, experience, and skill sets, but, who maybe know the business, less well, and may miss important, nuances in terms of, how to shape and point those digital opportunities in the most productive way? The answer is probably a little bit of both, for many, organizations, but there are, sort of unique solution elements, like thinking about specific roles that can act as, boundary spanning between, technology and business, where, there's individuals who actually, understand both of those dynamics, and can provide a, translation layer, and a way to reconcile, perspectives across the organization. On the other side, culture, the culture that exists in and around the folks doing this type of work can also be another big challenge. If you're, say, a automotive company, the historical, refresh on a vehicle is what measured in, years. But as vehicles become, more connected and more digital, that refresh rate for certain systems is now, measured, in months. And that has obvious implications for, process, but it also has big implications for, culture, and how you think about, innovation in that context. Teams need to be able to move much quicker and think about, continuous evolution, versus, big leaps. And so you need a different culture in order to, drive progress in a digital world than, maybe you do in a more, analog or traditionally product, focused world. And this issue of culture is often the Achilles heel of, many, digital transformations. It's often ignored by a lot of industrial organizations because it seems less tangible, certainly less tangible than maybe, systems, process, and certainly, technology. But in our experience, it's absolutely foundational. It's critical, and it won't change on its own. You need to be very intentional about how you think about what are the behaviors that we need to instill in our organization to be able to effectively drive, digital transformation and pursue the priorities that we set out, and what are the specific nudges that we're going to put in place in order to encourage them, in the organization. And then, last one, real quick is, collaboration. For all the reasons, that, we've talked about over the last 40 or so minutes, digital cannot be pursued in a silo. It's a very horizontal, activity that connects really across the organization. And so as you think about both the process of developing, digital priorities, as well as managing and executing them, there needs to be a process that's fairly inclusive. It's got to connect to the business unit leaders who are thinking about the overall objectives. It's got to connect to, the teams like marketing, sales, manufacturing, who are, tasked with shaping what the organization is doing and executing, the priorities. It's got to connect to, the corporate functions who are looking for, scale and efficiency opportunities, across the organization, just to name a few. And so really thinking about, as you're engaging in digital, what's the collaboration model? How do we work effectively across the organization to drive this? How do we break down some of the traditional silos that, exist in industrial organizations to be able to do this? Is really one of the other success factors that we see. That's a lot. Let me pause there, and Rob or Freddie, feel free to add on. I don't know if there's anything in the chat questions that we want to take on.
Let's maybe give it a second for any questions or comments to come on.
Yeah, as I look at this, I'm reminded. I a friend who is a teaching professional for golf, and he's expended a lot of frustrating hours trying to make me better at it. But one of the things that he said to me that really resonated, and that I think applies here in spades, is he said 80% of mistakes are made before you address the ball. So when you're thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and what your vision is for what you're trying to accomplish, when you're choosing the instrument that you're going to use to accomplish your goals, that's where the mistakes are made that then inhibit the value, and you see them manifested in the challenges we talked about earlier. And these are the ways to think about those. Granted, most companies are in flight on something now, but a moment to reflect and reset and calibrate some of those things and integrate them into the thinking is really what's called for.
Okay, maybe hit just a couple other pages here, and then we'll pause for final questions and discussion. So how do you go about doing this? How do you set clear and compelling digital priorities and ensure that the organization is set up to succeed? I think there aren't often pre-existing processes that are well suited to do this. But those processes can be developed so that you can make this repeatable and methodical. In the article that's shown here, that's associated with this webinar, and we'll put the link in the chat for folks who haven't seen it. We describe some of the steps that we have found useful. I'd encourage you all to take a look there if you're interested, as we won't have time to go into full detail here. But to give a flavor, the process for setting up digital priorities, I think can be quite systematic, and following a systematic process can ensure that you overcome some of the challenges that we talked about earlier, get the right engagement so that you get the organization aligned on what we're going to to do before you go off and start with execution. So a couple of the steps in the process that are foundational. It starts with clarifying, as we think about our business strategy, who are the critical customers and targets that we're trying to go after. This is a very needs to be a very customer market centric process. So we start with that as an anchor, and then for each of those groups, we understand what are the specific business goals or outcomes that we are trying to achieve for each of those customers. And more often than not, there's different goals and objectives for different customers. Certain archetypes, maybe the goal is to grow and innovate them in new and different ways. Others, you may simply want to figure out, how do we serve this customer more efficiently, but it's not an opportunity to to grow and innovate with. So you've got to clarify what those archetypes are, and then clarify the business goals associated with each of them. Then with that in mind, and Rob alluded to this earlier, you really need to understand where there are important and unsatisfied problems that digital might be a solution for. We use this terminology here called jobs to be done, which I think we found really helpful as we're bringing new tools and solutions potentially to customers. They may not be able to easily articulate the needs or the experience that they're looking for from a digital perspective. They're often limited and constrained in similar ways to we are. And so one of the tools that we find helpful for doing that is this idea of jobs to be done, which instead of focusing on a well-articulated solution or need, asks about what are the underlying problems that they're facing in their organization. We're wrestling with an overly complex, inventory management, system that's creating all types of headaches for it. They may not be able to articulate what the exact right solution is for that, but they can probably articulate, the underlying problem. And so armed with those types of insights, then we're in a position to, take those away and start thinking about, what are the different types of experiences and solutions, that we can bring to, be relevant to those. And we can think about, which of those experiences are things where, we need to invest to, be at par with the market and continue to, earn the right to, serve customers, but that are not going to be necessarily differentiating for us. And which of those experiences are places where we really want to, invest because we see the opportunity to do something, different and unique that's going to give us a differentiated position, in the market. So, and then obviously, and it's not stated here, but obviously, once you've got clarity on, what those solutions are that are going to solve real problems, that are going to help you advance business outcomes for your priority customers, then you can take a look at, okay, now what are the right technologies that we need? What are the right, operating model elements, that we need in order to, drive those effectively? But those investments now are strongly coupled to what you're trying to do, from a business perspective. So that's the, sort of key elements, of the process. As I said, there's more detail in the, in the paper, for folks who are interested in seeing that.
There's a question that came as you were speaking, Ned, on, I think most companies are in the realm of deep engineering. The lack of vision and design is a huge issue. What's your take on that?
Agreement, a strong agreement, with that. Goes back to this issue of, I said one of the, the success factors is you've got to have a clear and compelling, strategy that, has a meaningfully compelling, vision, associated with it. And that's not how a lot of organizations operate. If you think about strategy setting in a lot of organizations, it's more of a planning exercise, right? I mean, it looks, a couple, 2-3 years out, largely assumes a degree of stability, uses historical data, and you get a lot of incrementalism associated with that. And that's not necessarily, a bad thing, in and of itself. But when you're in an environment that has elements of disruption, and certainly digital is a disruptive technology, to a lot of markets, that type of limited vision setting and strategy setting can get you into, quite a bit of trouble. And so, we encourage a lot of organizations to embrace much more of, what you might call a future back mindset, where you're really, looking 10 years out, understanding where, markets are going to go, how the ecosystem is going to change, how different technologies are going to come in and fundamentally, reshape things. And then using that as a reference to have a conversation about what's a sustainable, attractive position for us in that. And then let's figure out how we get there from, where we are today. So I think, just strongly supportive of that, comment. And if you don't have, that, a business vision that is, compelling and future oriented, you'll always be, I think, fundamentally constraining your ability to, really do something different with digital.
There's another question that came up. Shall you not start with the job to be done and then define the business outcome in your process? You have, outcome first and job to be done after.
Yeah, Rob, do you want to take that? Or you want me to take it?
Well, I could start with it. I think, first of all, I think that's probably an iterative thought process in actuality. But our bias was to engage the organization by thinking about what it's trying to achieve in terms of a business outcome. So growth in a certain market space, for example, as an organizing impetus to make the progress, and then in analyzing how to make that progress, going very deep on understanding customers' jobs to be done. And then thinking of that as an opportunity space within which digital can enable you to drive towards your growth. So that was, that's the logic behind the way that we've the way that we've organized it. I wouldn't be terrifically upset if you started by understanding customer jobs to be done and then folded that into your consideration of business outcomes. But I think you can actually look at it either way. I'd be happy for my colleagues to tell me I've got that all wrong, but that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, I think it's well said.
Very well said. Yeah, one of the main points that we've been thinking a lot about is just how do you keep the outcomes orientation front and center, so you can design for that specific outcome. And so it's highly iterative, but we would emphasize to Ned's point, like the orientation is the connection to business strategy is going to be through those business outcomes. So keeping those front and center is the rationale what we started there. But full recognition, nobody's going to argue if you start with a job to be done, which is highly critical as well and highly iterative.
The important thing is to do the work on jobs to be done. Because they're changing, right? And this connects back to Ned's point earlier about having a perspective, anchored to what's happening more broadly in your ecosystem over time. How the solutions that others will bring to bear to help your customers to make progress against their jobs to be done are going to be changing dramatically once you look past your immediate planning horizon, your next 3 years, present forward kind of mindset. You start to discover meaningful change and meaningful opportunity.
Yeah, it's great. So maybe one last, page, I think, that just could be helpful. So where to get started, with this, how do you know, where you are? We think about, 4 questions that I think are, often helpful, to ask, your organization. So, one, how sufficient is your strategy for a digitally enabled world? I think that goes a bit to this question that we've been talking about. Is the strategy sufficiently future oriented? What really is the vision, within the organization? Second question around, are our digital priorities anchored to, clear, business outcomes? 3, have we thought about, how digital is going to integrate with our business model as opposed to being, appendage that, we try to simply, bolt on? And then 3rd, how do we think about the operating model? People, culture, talent, process, all of that in order to drive digital. If you answer no to any of those, or certainly all of those, you're probably not realizing the full value of digital and contributing to some of the statistics that Rob cited at the beginning of the presentation. So I think we find these questions helpful for starting to spur a conversation internal to a company about where are we at, and do we have a challenge that's worth looking at? And maybe with that, I think we've covered a lot in 55 minutes here. We've got 5 minutes left. Certainly happy to take any questions and try to answer them in the time that we have. Obviously, you've got our emails here. We're always excited to talk about this topic, and we'd be pleased to spend additional time with any of you, should that be helpful. Well, with that, I think we'd like to collectively thank you all for your time. I know everybody's busy, so we're pleased to have you join, and thanks for putting questions and engaging in the chat. And yeah, thanks again, and hope all is well.
Thanks, everyone.